Welcome back to the Sixth Gear Garage. Last time I painted this engine bay and I'm extremely happy with the way this turned out. And here's the engine for the truck, but I can't go drop this old dirty, crusty, rusty engine into that nice clean engine bay. So today I'm going to strip it down of all its accessories, remove this very ugly factory header, and clean this block and paint it. And I'll also clean up these accessories while I have those off, and do something with this dirty valve cover as well. Now I'm going to clean this block using the laser cleaner. And if I didn't have this, I'd be stuck using these and it would take probably at least 10 times as long. This is a 200 watt pulsed laser cleaning machine by Fortune Laser. I've had this for a couple of months now and it saves me so much time at removing paint, rust, oil, grease, and grime from all metal surfaces. If you're interested in learning more about this machine, I recently made a full video all about it that I'll put a link to in the description. Here's a quick look at the actual speed of the machine. It still takes some time to remove everything from the surface, but I sure don't miss pressure washing and using wire wheels on a drill. Back to time-lapse mode. First, I'm cleaning the parts with brake cleaner. Once dry, I'm applying a coat of engine primer. After about 10 minutes, I'm starting with one light coat of VHT black engine paint. And 10 minutes later, a second light coat, followed by a third medium coat after another 10 minutes. And I used the same process for these cast iron brackets. And then I painted the motor mounts. So even after all of that cleaning with the laser cleaner, there's still a little bit more attention I need to give this block. In some areas where there was really heavy grime, you can see I'm left with this sort of pile of burnt crispiness. And that's just because there's just so much oil and grease that even though it does blast it, and turn it into dust basically is to kind of sits in some of these low areas just because there's nowhere for it to go. So I need to go back with a wire brush and just hit those really quick. And for a block that has all these contours, this is a brush made to clean battery terminals, and it has wires on both ends, one bigger and one smaller. And this is perfect to get in all these recessed areas. And I'll put a link to one of these in the description. And once again, Ohio strikes. Just like last time when I painted the engine bay, I had it sitting out just out here in the open, and it's very humid this time of year in the spring because it's warm, cold, lots of rain. Just in a couple days from the first time I laser cleaned this block, I've already got some surface rust coming back on this clean cast iron. So I need to go ahead and just hit this again really quick, and then I'll be able to mask it off, give it a final degreasing, and throw some paint on. All right, now the block is all cleaned up, and I might have got a little sloppy with the laser there. Now I'm gonna hit it with some degreaser. Okay, this block is ready for paint. Now you might ask, why do I leave all the bolts in place? Well, the bolts do a good job of covering up the bolt holes so that paint doesn't go inside and clog up the threads. Where there are no bolts, I did roll up some tape and put them inside the holes on both sides. I left the oil filter in place because it does a great job of masking off the mounting surface for an oil filter. So I'm gonna replace this anyway, so I might as well use it and get some overspray on that. I did mask off the oil pressure sensor. And over on this side, I left these bolts in place, and I masked off those extra holes as well. I was so happy with the results that I got using the Aera paints on this engine bay in the last episode that I'm going to use some Aera paint again, and this time I'm going to be using some blue engine paint. And this can only be ordered online. I'll put a link to their website in the description. And this is better than the stuff you're going to buy at your local store because it's a 2K paint, meaning it has an activator, a hardener inside, that once you pull this red cap off the top here and use it to push in this little button on the bottom, the hardener and the paint mix, and you have 8 hours to use up this can before it hardens. And that's gonna give this 2K paint the same longevity and strength over time that you would get using a 2K paint through a spray gun. And to be honest, I actually prefer an aerosol can for things like this because you have a lot of little nooks and crannies to get into, and it's hard to get all that with the wide spray of a spray gun without also getting too much paint in the easy to reach areas and having that run. I mean, seeing how well this turned out, I have no doubt that the engine's gonna look good. So first, shake for 2 minutes. Next, pull off the red cap, put it on the bottom. And I'm gonna need to push this on a hard surface to push this cap and the button through the bottom of the can. There it was. And just give it a couple extra pushes just to make sure it's all the way through. And now shake for 2 more minutes. Now when I painted the white engine bay in the last episode, you can see where I had the truck. And I don't mind white overspraying the floor because it honestly makes it look sort of clean, but I don't want blue overspray on the floor. So I'm gonna go and spray this down really quick with some water just to make cleaning up a lot easier. And I'm gonna turn on my box fan to get some ventilation to push that overspray straight out the door, and put on my mask, and I'm gonna narrate the rest of this in a voiceover. So after activating, it's important to first spray the can upside down for 2 seconds to make sure that any unactivated paint that was already in the tube or nozzle gets out. And one more test spray right side up. Notice I'm not covering the surface all the way, and that's actually best for the first coat. The first coat is a light coat. It's important not to go too heavy on the first coat. If I spray too heavy at first, that can lead to runs or sags. Light coats allow the thickness to build up without that happening. Moving on to the other side of the block, and you might notice that I'm really fighting the breeze from the fan. It seems like half of what I was spraying was blowing out the door. So I turned the box fan down a notch. And that was much better. Now it's blowing away the overspray, but not really preventing much paint from landing on the surface of the block. An engine block has a lot of contours and recessed areas, so I'm spraying from a lot of different angles to get all of those areas covered. And this is all I need for the first coat, which is a light coat, and I'm gonna let this dry for about 10 minutes. And it's only been about 5 minutes. You can see where I got some spray on this oil filter. It's not sticky at all, just barely tacky. So we're good for coat 2. And the second coat was another light coat, just like coat 1. I went a little heavier on the third coat, but not heavy enough to consider it a wet coat. It was starting to look pretty good, but then I noticed something. There was a huge patch of fuzzies on the surface that I somehow didn't catch before. At this point, the best I could do was to very lightly wipe them with my finger. Some of the fuzzies fell off, and the more embedded ones got pressed down flush with the surface. Luckily, this happened on the block where it won't really be noticeable instead of somewhere more obvious, such as on the valve cover, which I'll be painting later in the video. After 3 coats, I had about 1/3 of the paint left in the can, so I decided to make the 4th coat the final coat, aka the wet coat. I'm staying about 6 to 8 inches away from the surface here, and on this last coat, the goal is to lay it down heavier to fill in any areas that have a lighter overspray texture from the earlier lighter coats. You know that sort of dull, dusty looking finish you get on the surface from a light coat? This wet coat will leave a smooth gloss finish on the surface, but I just have to be careful I don't go too heavy and end up with a run. And to be honest, painting this block is a fraction of the stress level from when I painted the engine bay in the last video. Because in the end, a lot of this block isn't going to be visible once the accessories are on and it's installed in the truck. I mean, nobody's going to jam their head under the intake manifold and look for runs. Besides, it's a shop truck, not a show truck. Notice I start from the rear where the fan is, so that the overspray flows past the area that I have not yet painted. And right about now, my finger was getting pretty tired. At this point, the can is almost empty, and I checked over for any areas that looked a little on the light side. Before the overspray had a chance to dry on the floor, I washed it outside. Then I went inside and washed up. So it's had a couple of hours to dry now and start to set up. It's past the sticky stage. Tested on the tape here. And it's barely tacky, but you can see a lot of these fuzzies actually pop back up, and I realized later on I forgot to go over it with the tack rag, just like I did with the engine bay. So that's why a lot of those fuzzies are still stuck on there. Plus, this is a very rough surface, which makes it even more likely to grab onto those fuzzies from the towel. But if a lot of these, if I just slightly rub them with my finger, they'll end up falling right off. But yeah, after a couple hours, once the paint starts to set up and it's not so sticky anymore, then I'm free to pull off the tape. And you don't want to do it when it's completely dry, because then there's a chance that it could actually tear the paint and pull it off of the block if it's not well adhered. If you do it when the paint is still a little tiny bit soft, it'll just tear the paint at the seam. I removed the paper and masking tape from the timing cover, but left it elsewhere because I was going to paint the timing cover next. Now the sides of the block looked great, but the front of the engine didn't look so good in comparison. The next day, after the blue engine paint had cured completely, I masked off the front timing cover. Now for the timing cover and water pump here. These parts are so small they're not going to bother wasting a whole can of 2K paint. So I just have some old high heat engine paint by Duplicolor here. But first, I'm going to lay down some engine primer. I started with one light coat. And I did not expect this to be that shiny and that metallic of a finish. This looks really good, almost like polished aluminum, with the exceptions of those rough spots in the castings. But this is actually discontinued. Duplicolor is owned by Sherwin, who since bought VHT in like the, I don't know, mid 2000s. And they discontinued this to bring that into the lineup. So this is like a 20-year-old can of paint and it still works great, but unfortunately it's no longer available. Followed by a second light coat. And then the third wet coat. And while that dried, I got to work on some of the accessories. This distributor was filthy, covered in oil and grease. But the laser cleaner does a great job at removing that. I just had to be careful not to let the laser burn the harness. This smog pump is aluminum and steel, and both cleaned up well. I cleaned up the factory cast iron exhaust manifold, even though in the end, I decided not to use it on the engine. Then I unmasked the timing cover and water pump, and removed the paper from the rest of the engine since everything was now painted that I planned on painting. I used a wire wheel to brighten up the surface of the distributor, and did the same for the alternator. As well as the thermostat housing. Then I used a softer brass wire cup to clean up the aluminum cylinder head and give it some shine. And cleaned up the body of the Weber carb as well. Alright, wife is out of the house today. I gotta bake these parts that I painted with the black engine paint at 200 degrees for 1 hour to cure them. So let's put this one up here. We'll leave that one here. There should be enough space to set everything in here and hang it. Alright, bake. 200, and we'll come check on these in 60 minutes. So you may remember this valve cover from the last episode. I had it completely painted to match the white engine bay over there. I was painted with the 2K Aero paints. However, there was a flaw in the casting, and I went ahead and sanded this down to the point where it's pretty smooth. I can't drag it with my fingernail. So this area is good. It's ready to be repainted again. But now the rest of the valve cover needs to be sanded down because I used 3 rounds of paint stripper to get that white Aero paint off. And that is some very resilient paint. You can see there's still a lot left on there and all the little low spots in the castings and along like this edge here. Nothing I can do can get that off. The laser cleaner didn't touch it. The paint stripper didn't touch it. So I'm just gonna do it the old fashioned way and take it off with some sandpaper and maybe a wire brush. Then I blasted it with some brake cleaner to be sure the surface was clean. First, I threw down some engine primer, but I could still see some imperfections in the surface after 1 coat. So I applied a second coat of primer, and then 1 light coat of white paint, followed by a second light coat. And on the third coat, you can see I had a run on the side. So I stopped mid-coat and picked up the valve cover and held it upside down so that gravity would stop the run from going any further. And that worked pretty well. The run did stop and almost completely leveled out. But the paint appeared to be a little brighter white in the area of the run because it was thicker right there. This coat was the wet coat, and it evened out the white while giving the whole surface a nice gloss. So here's how it turned out after that last coat of white. You can see I was able to sort of level out that run. If you look really close, you can kind of see where it was, just a little bit. It's a little bit thick right there. But the rest of the valve cover is looking great, especially on the front where you're gonna see it the most, and of course on the top. Now once this starts to set a little bit and dry, I'm gonna go back and remove the paint from these raised areas on the Toyota and these two stripes right here and bring those back down to bare metal. And while I was doing that, these parts were able to bake for 200 degrees for 1 hour, and now this paint is cured. I've let this dry for about 40 minutes now. You can see it's not very sticky or tacky anymore, but I need to remove this paint. And if I do that with some sandpaper and a block, it's probably gonna clog up the paper because the paint is still a little bit soft. So I'm going to very carefully scrape off that top edge with a razor blade. After I scraped off the paint and most of the primer, I block sanded the raised areas in one direction with some 400 grit sandpaper to give the metal a shiny machined finish. So while my white valve cover is curing, let's put some of these parts laying around back on the engine. I'm checking the timing for top dead center before installing the distributor. I decided this would be a good time to replace the factory exhaust manifold studs with some new ones from LCE Engineering. Now I've got the LCE header studs installed, but I can't just go putting this little ugly thing back on there. Upgrade. The header is made by Flowtech, and although it was about $300, it is stainless and it looks so much better than the factory exhaust manifold. I'll put a link to this header in the description if you're interested. Now it's time for the final piece to the puzzle, getting this old thing out of here, and time to put on this masterpiece that I've spent so much time on. But first, it's been well over a year now since this motor has been started. I'm gonna go ahead and add some oil while the valve cover's off so I can get this valve train nice and lubricated. Ideal time to do this before I put the valve cover back on there. Get the mechanical fuel pump as well. And there it is. Although I am gonna have to go back and get some nicer hardware. So let me know, what do you guys think? Did it turn out pretty nice? I'm happy with it. May not be for everybody. The only thing I'm not crazy about that I don't really want to go back and change now is the red oil pan. I painted that long before I thought I'd be laser cleaning and repainting this whole engine, so I just threw what I had on it to make it not rust. And well, you're not gonna be able to see much of that when it's in the engine bay anyways. Red, white, and blue, America right there. Now before I can drop this engine into this engine bay, I need to lift this entire cab off of the rusty Ohio frame and drop it onto the clean, freshly painted Southern frame. And then I'll be able to mate this 20R engine to this 5-speed W50 transmission. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching.